Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Shack. Now I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you go, I thought it would be fun if everyone could leave a comment to let me know where you're listening from. The world likes it too, and subscribe if you like these episodes. Let's sit back and relax and let's get started. To block out the sun, it was as if he didn't want anyone to see inside. That's when I began to get a bad feeling about the whole situation. A few days later, I decided to take a closer look. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but my curiosity was overwhelming. It wasn't like me to pry into someone else's affairs, but something about this guy felt deeply wrong. I waited until it was dark, thinking it would be easier to sneak around without being seen. I stepped into my backyard, staying close to the fence that separated our properties. The night was quiet, the air heavy and still. I could see his house clearly, and sure enough, there he was again, in his backyard, digging under the dim light of a single bulb hanging from his porch. I crouched behind some bushes and watched him for a while. The longer I observed, the more I realized how methodical he was. He wasn't digging random holes, he was measuring the space, ensuring everything was exact. He never looked around, never seemed to check if anyone was watching. It was as if he was completely focused on whatever he was doing. When he finally finished, he stood there for a moment, just staring at the hole. Then he started dragging something out of his garage, a long object wrapped in a tarp. My heart began to pound as I realized it was about the size of a body. He moved slowly, carefully lowering the wrapped object into the hole before covering it with dirt. I don't know how long I stayed crouched behind those bushes, but it felt like forever. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. I knew I should call the police, but something kept me there, watching and waiting to see what he would do next. After he finished burying whatever it was, he wiped his hands on his pants and headed back into the house. I waited a few minutes before standing up, my legs stiff from crouching for so long. I felt an overwhelming urge to check the spot he had just covered. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't help myself. I climbed over the fence as quietly as I could, landing softly in his backyard. The dirt was freshly turned and easy to dig through. I started scraping it away with my hands, my heart pounding harder with every handful I moved. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something terrible. As I dug, I glanced back at the house, half expecting him to come out and catch me, but the place remained dark and silent. I dug faster, dirt flying around me, until my hands hit something solid, a tarp, just like the one I'd seen him drag out of the garage. My breath caught in my throat. I hesitated, then slowly peeled back the tarp, my fingers trembling. Just as I began to see what was underneath, I heard a creak behind me. I whipped around, and there he was, standing at the back door, watching me. His face was in shadow, but I could see the glint of his eyes under the brim of his hat. He didn't say anything, he just stood there, staring at me. My heart raced so fast I thought it might explode. I scrambled to my feet, not bothering to cover the tarp back up, and bolted for the fence. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. I was over the fence and back in my yard in seconds, but I didn't stop. I ran straight into my house, locking the door behind me. I stood in the dark, trying to catch my breath, my mind spinning. What the hell had I just seen, and why hadn't he stopped me? I peeked out the window, but his yard was dark, the light was off, and there was no sign of him. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the hole, the tarp, the way he just stood there watching me. I wanted to call the police, but I was too scared. What if they didn't believe me? What if he came after me if he found out I reported him? The next morning, I tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I looked out the window, I expected to see him standing there, staring back at me, but he was never there. I went to work, trying to focus, but all I could think about was what I'd seen. When I got home that evening, his car was gone, and the house was dark, just like it had been the night before. I waited, watching from my window, but he didn't come back. Days passed, and there was no sign of him. The bad feeling in my gut only grew worse. One night, I finally worked up the nerve to call the police. I told them everything about the digging, the tarp, and how he just stood there watching me. They sent someone over to check it out, but by the time they arrived, it was too late. The backyard was empty, the hole filled in, the dirt smoothed over like nothing had ever happened. They knocked on his door, but there was no answer. The house was empty. They went inside but found nothing, no signs of a struggle, no evidence of a crime, just an empty house with black plastic covering the windows. They told me there wasn't much they could do without proof, it was just my word against nothing. They said they'd keep an eye out, but I could tell they didn't really believe me. After the police left, I couldn't stay in the house anymore. I crashed at a friend's place for a while, constantly thinking about the way he'd watched me, the way he knew I was there, digging up whatever he buried. I never found out what was in that hole or where my neighbor went. The house stayed empty after that, eventually going up for sale. I couldn't go back, not after what I'd seen. I moved out of that neighborhood, out of that town, trying to put as much distance between me and that place as I could. A few weeks later, I parked my car in an underground garage just after 11 p.m. It was one of those big concrete structures, the kind that seemed to swallow sound. The echoes of my footsteps bounced off the walls as I walked to the elevator. The place was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered around, most of the lights flickering or dim. It had that stale smell like exhaust and old rainwater, and it always gave me the creeps. But it was late, and finding parking on the street that late was impossible, so I didn't have much choice. I had gone out with some friends for dinner, nothing crazy. When I came back to the garage, it was even quieter than before, like the whole place was holding its breath. I stepped off the elevator on the lower level where I'd left my car. My heels clicked on the concrete, and the sound seemed way too loud in the silence. I looked around, expecting to see my car just where I left it, but it wasn't there. I stood there for a moment, confused. Maybe I was just on the wrong level. That had to be it. I walked down the row, checking the other side, but my car wasn't anywhere. My heart started to race a little. It was a stupid mistake to make, but I was sure I parked here. I was tired, though, maybe I was just mixed up. I went back to the elevator and tried another level, but again, no car. That uneasy feeling in my stomach started to grow. I knew I hadn't been wrong. I could picture exactly where I parked, right by that flickering light near the far wall, but the space was empty. I pulled out my phone, thinking I'd call someone, but the signal was terrible down there, the bars kept flickering in and out. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a mix-up, maybe a towing mistake or something. I started walking around the garage, checking every row, but each one was empty, just shadows and cold concrete. As I walked, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. In one of the darker corners, just past a broken light, I saw some movement. It wasn't much, just a shift in the darkness, like someone was standing there, watching me. I froze, squinting into the shadows, but I couldn't see anything clearly. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see someone step out of the darkness, but the corner stayed still. I picked up my pace, my heels clicking faster on the concrete. I just wanted to find my car and get out of there. I reached the far end of the garage and turned around, thinking maybe I'd missed something. That's when I saw him. A man was standing a few rows over, just barely visible under one of the dim lights. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, and he was looking right at me. My heart nearly stopped. I couldn't see his face clearly, but there was something about the way he stood so still that made my blood run cold. For a second, I thought about calling out to him, asking if he'd seen anything, but something in my gut told me not to. Instead, I turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction, hoping he'd just leave me alone. I didn't hear any footsteps, but I felt like he was following me, like his eyes were boring into the back of my head. I kept walking, trying to stay calm, but my mind was racing. I needed to find my car, get to safety. I checked every row, every corner, but the garage was like a maze, and I felt more lost with every step. The man was nowhere to be seen now, but that just made it worse. I knew he was still there, somewhere in the shadows, watching. My breath was coming faster, and I could feel panic rising in my chest. I was trying to think of a plan, something that would get me out of this. I decided to head for the exit. Maybe I could find a security guard or someone who could help. But as I got closer to the exit, I saw the same man standing by the doors, waiting. He was closer now, and I could see his face. It was blank, almost expressionless, but there was something cold in his eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. I stopped in my tracks, not sure what to do. He didn't move, he just stood there, blocking my way out. I turned and walked quickly back into the garage, not caring about the noise my shoes made anymore. My only thought was to get away from him, but the deeper I went, the more lost I felt. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing darker and thicker. My car was nowhere to be found, and I knew I was running out of time. I heard footsteps behind me, soft at first, then louder. He was following me. I broke into a run, not caring if he heard me. My heels clacked against the concrete as I sprinted down the rows, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't dare look back, too scared of what I might see. I rounded a corner, trying to put as much distance between us as possible, but the footsteps were getting closer. My chest was tight, panic gripping me hard. I knew I couldn't keep running forever. I had to find a way out, something to hide behind, anything. Suddenly, I saw a maintenance door slightly ajar at the end of the row. I sprinted toward it, yanking it open and slipping inside just as the footsteps rounded the corner behind me. I shut the door as quietly as I could, pressing my back against it and holding my breath. I was in a small, dark room filled with cleaning supplies and tools. The air was thick with the smell of chemicals. I listened, straining to hear anything outside, but all I could make out was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I stood there frozen for what felt like hours. Every sound made me jump, every creak of the building convinced me that he was right outside. I didn't know if he'd seen me, if he was waiting for me to come out, or if he'd moved on, but I couldn't stay there forever. Slowly, I inched the door open just a crack, peeking out into the garage. It was empty, the rows stretching out in eerie silence. I didn't see him, but that didn't make me feel any safer. I slipped out of the room, staying low, and started moving toward the nearest exit. My car was gone. I knew that now. Maybe it had been stolen, maybe towed, or maybe something else entirely. I couldn't worry about that anymore. I just needed to get out of there. As I approached the exit again, I scanned the area, my heart in my throat. I didn't see him, and the doors were in sight, just a few more steps. I forced myself to keep moving, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. Just as I reached the doors, I heard a sound behind me, a soft, slow scrape of a shoe against concrete. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I pushed through the doors and into the stairwell, practically leaping down the steps two at a time. I could hear him now, right behind me, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the stairwell. I burst out onto the street, the cool night air hitting me like a shock. I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away, surrounded by the lights and noise of the city. Only then did I look back, but the street was empty, no sign of him anywhere. I found a cab and got in, shaking all over as we pulled away. I couldn't help but look back at the garage, half expecting to see him standing in the doorway watching me leave, but there was nothing. I was driving through Oregon, just passing through on a long road trip. It was getting late, and I'd been on the road for hours without a break, so when I saw a sign for a rest area, I figured I'd stop. It was one of those small, out-of-the-way spots, just a couple of picnic tables and a restroom building surrounded by trees. There wasn't another car inside, but I didn't think much of it. The place seemed deserted. I parked my car and got out, stretching my legs before heading to the restroom. The air was cool, and everything was quiet, except for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. The building looked old, worn down, but I didn't care. I just needed to use the bathroom and get back on the road. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. It was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering every few seconds. The smell of stale air hit me as I walked further in, my footsteps echoing off the tile floor. There were a few stalls on one side and a row of sinks on the other. It was completely empty. I picked a stall near the back, not really paying attention to anything else. I just wanted to get in and out as fast as possible. The door creaked as I shut it behind me, and I could hear the faint sound of the wind outside, whistling through the cracks in the walls. I finished up and flushed, then went to open the stall door, but it wouldn't budge. I pushed harder, thinking it was just stuck, but it still wouldn't move. That's when I realized something was wrong. I hadn't locked it, so there was no reason for it to be jammed like that. I tried again, harder this time, but it didn't move an inch. My heart started pounding, a cold sweat forming on my forehead. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. Maybe the door was just old, maybe it was swollen or something, but no matter how hard I pushed, it wouldn't give. Panic started to creep in, but I told myself to relax. I decided to crawl under the door, but as I crouched down, I heard voices outside, muffled but clear enough to make out some words. They were talking about me. I froze, my heart skipping a beat as I listened. There were at least two of them, maybe more. Their voices were low but tense. I couldn't hear everything, but what I caught was enough to send a chill down my spine. When he comes out, not yet, don't mess this up. They were waiting for me. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but it was clear that whatever they had planned, it wasn't good. I pressed my ear to the stall door, trying to make out more, but the voices faded, and I couldn't hear anything except the pounding of my own heart. I looked around the stall, desperate for a way out. The window was too high and too small to crawl through, and the door was still jammed tight. My mind raced as I tried to think of something, anything, that could help me. I thought about calling for help, but my phone was in the car, and even if I had it, I doubted there'd be a signal out here. I stood there, trapped, every second feeling like an hour. The voices outside started up again, louder this time, closer. They were arguing, and I caught the tail end of a sentence that made my blood run cold. Should just break it down. I knew I didn't have much time. They were getting impatient, and it wouldn't be long before they decided to force their way in. I looked around the stall again, and that's when I saw a small vent near the floor, just big enough for me to crawl through if I could break the cover off. I hurried over to it, my hand shaking as I tried to pry the cover off with my fingers. It was rusted and loose, but it wasn't coming off easily. The voices outside grew louder, more agitated. I could hear footsteps now, pacing back and forth, and the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. I knew I didn't have much time. I gave the vent cover one last yank, and it finally gave way, the metal screeching as it came loose. I didn't waste a second. I dropped to the floor and started crawling through the narrow space, the metal edges scraping against my skin as I wriggled through. The vent was tight, claustrophobic, and I could barely move. I could hear the voices getting closer, their footsteps echoing in the restroom. I crawled faster, pushing myself through the cramped space, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where the vent led, but anywhere was better than where I was. Just as I made it to the other side, I heard a loud crash behind me, the unmistakable sound of the stall door being kicked open. They were in the restroom now, just a few feet away, and my breath caught in my throat. I hesitated for a moment before pushing myself through the vent's opening and tumbling into a dimly lit storage room. The air was stale, filled with the scent of cleaning supplies and dust. I quickly scrambled to my feet, scanning the room for a way out. There were shelves stacked with old mops and buckets, but no visible exit. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to calm my racing heart as I listened for any signs of movement from the restroom. Footsteps echoed outside the door, followed by hushed voices. "He must have gone this way," one of them said, sounding frustrated. The other replied, "Check the maintenance room. He can't be far." Panic surged through me. I needed to act fast. I spotted a small window near the ceiling, too high to reach without something to climb on. I quickly grabbed a stack of boxes, piling them up in a desperate attempt to reach it. As I stood on the makeshift platform, I could hear the door to the storage room creak open behind me. I glanced back just in time to see a figure silhouetted in the doorway, their face obscured by shadows. "He's in here," they shouted, and I felt a rush of adrenaline as I scrambled up the boxes. I pushed against the window with all my strength, praying it would open. To my relief, it gave way, and I squeezed through just as the figure lunged forward. The cool night air hit me like a wave as I dropped down into the alley outside. I landed hard but quickly rolled to my feet and took off running, heart racing, breath coming in quick gasps. Behind me, I could hear shouts and footsteps pounding against the ground. The alley stretched out before me, dark and narrow, but it felt like my only option. I darted around a corner, hoping to lose them in the maze of streets. I kept running, adrenaline fueling my escape, but the fear of being caught pushed me faster. I didn't dare look back, I just focused on the path ahead, desperate for safety. Finally, I spotted a glow in the distance, streetlights illuminating a busy road. I sprinted toward it, my lungs burning, praying for the sight of people, cars, anything that could offer protection. As I burst onto the main street, I turned to see if they were still behind me. The alley was empty now, the shadows swallowing everything. I leaned against a lamppost, gasping for breath, relief washing over me. I'd made it, but the fear lingered, a chilling reminder of how close I'd come to being caught. I think I finally found my friend's killer. 2 years ago, my best friend, Maggie, vanished. One night, she was out with friends celebrating finals being done, laughing, living, just a college kid letting off steam. And the next morning? Gone. She was driving home to visit her parents for the weekend. Her car was found empty on a remote highway just outside of Meridian, Idaho, miles from town. The police combed the area, but their conclusion was maddening. She'd been drinking with friends. We know that much. Something happened on the road. She stopped, went looking for help, and probably ended up succumbing to nature. Maggie probably had a drink or two after finishing finals. But no way she was drunk driving, if that's what they were insinuating. That wasn't Maggie. Then one of the idiots even suggested she'd just taken off, like she decided on a whim to leave her life behind. But I knew Maggie. I knew she would never just disappear. I knew something had happened to her. Something dark. The police haven't made any progress and consider Maggie's case cold. I feel terrible for her and her family. Every time I press the police, I get the same tired answer. These things happen sometimes. I knew better. Maggie didn't just wander off, and neither did the two other college kids who vanished over the past 5 years after nights of partying, found only by their abandoned cars along these lonely mountain roads. Someone was out there, lurking, and if no one else was going to do anything about it, then I would. Or I guess I'd try my best. When my grandma passed away earlier this year, she left me an inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to change my life. Enough that I could take a break from work, enough that I didn't have to worry about paying rent for a while. Enough to make a difference. I could have put it towards something practical, something responsible, but what good would that do when my best friend was still missing and the police weren't even trying? There was no better way to spend it than to find Maggie's killer. So, I put the money to use. I bought 5 used cars at a local auction, all different models, different colors, all registered with different plates. I outfitted each with a dash cam on the front and back, and made each car as inconspicuous as possible. My goal was simple: make myself look like a random college kid on the road each night, and hope that I could draw him out. I'd change my appearance too: wigs, hats, glasses. I needed to blend in. I needed to look like an easy target. For months, I drove that damn mountain road. I mapped out a pattern from all the disappearances I could track, finding the routes where people had vanished while driving them alone in the dead of night. 5 nights a week, I was there, just waiting for him to follow me. I imagined what I would do when I caught him, how I'd turn the tables and make him face the consequences once I got him on camera. But tonight, as I sat on the edge of the lonely highway, at 3 a.m., waiting in the black Toyota Camry I'd picked up, all I felt was exhaustion. The kind of tired that sits behind your eyes and digs in. Too many nightmares, too many nights lying awake, feeling the weight of everything pressing in. Part of me thought about skipping it tonight, but I couldn't. I couldn't risk missing him. I climbed into the car, threw a thermos of coffee onto the passenger seat, and set off. The road was empty, silent. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of branches in the breeze. I followed my usual route, the same one Maggie would have taken home that last night. For the first hour, there was nothing. Just empty darkness stretching ahead and behind. But then, just as I was about to turn back, I noticed headlights in the rearview mirror. My pulse raced. Cars sometimes popped up on this road, but not often. And this one felt wrong. I tried to ignore the sense of dread building in my chest, telling myself it was just another driver, but my instincts wouldn't let it go. The car was too close, its headlights glaring in my mirrors, keeping an unnerving distance. I slowed down, just a little, just to see. The car behind me slowed too, matching my pace perfectly. A chill crawled up my spine, but I kept my expression calm, my hands steady on the wheel. This was it. This had to be it. I eased off the gas, letting my speed drop even further, almost to a crawl. If they wanted to pass, they'd have their chance. But they didn't. They stayed right behind me, hanging back just far enough that I couldn't make out the make or model of the car. The seconds dragged on, my heart beat loud in my ears. I told myself to reach for my phone, to start recording from my POV as well, but my hands were frozen. I was too scared. I kept my eyes on the road, feeling my pulse thundering in my temples. And then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, the headlights veered off onto a side road, disappearing into the trees. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, feeling the tension drain from my body. Relief washed over me, followed by a sickening disappointment. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe I was just scaring myself. I pulled over at a small turnout, resting my forehead against the steering wheel, my eyes stinging with exhaustion. My mind raced with doubts, questions, anger. What if I was wasting my time? What if Maggie was truly lost to something I could never find? The world was silent, pressing in on me, but I forced myself to take a deep breath and close my eyes, just for a moment. I thought I'd rest for a few minutes, clear my head. Then the sound of gravel crunching snapped me awake. I looked up, heart pounding, to see headlights creeping up behind me. My blood ran cold as I recognized the car. It was the same one, back again. They'd been watching, waiting. I felt a surge of fear and anger as the driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out, a tall, stocky man in a white shirt. He didn't hesitate. He was sprinting toward me, his steps heavy and determined. Panic took over, and I fumbled with the keys, my fingers trembling as I jammed them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed on the gas, the tires spinning on the gravel before gripping. I shot forward, the headlights disappearing behind me as I sped down the road. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, his face twisted in anger or disappointment. I couldn't tell which. But I'd seen that look before, on other men, other nights. The look of a predator who had just lost his prey. My hands were shaking as I drove, adrenaline flooding my veins, my mind a whirlwind of fear and fury. I'd been so certain I was in control, that I could outsmart him. But in that moment, I realized how wrong I'd been. I'd been playing with fire, and it almost consumed me. I kept driving, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see those headlights reappear. But the road remained empty, stretching out ahead of me like an endless, dark tunnel. It was only when I reached the lights of Meridian that I finally pulled over, my entire body shaking as I gripped the wheel. I sat there in silence, staring into the darkness. I still didn't have the answers I wanted. But I felt like I was closer to finding the truth about what happened to Maggie. One thing was abundantly clear, he was still out there, waiting for someone else to stumble onto that road, another college kid, just like Maggie. Honestly, I'm a little overwhelmed tonight. I'm going to go get the USB memory cards from my dash cameras in the morning. I'm not ready to look at what's on them yet. I know once I do, there's no going back. I work in an IT department and found this email in the drafts folder of a missing employee. Hey love. I know it's late. Actually, I'm not sure when you'll get this email. I'm sorry I haven't called you back yet. I've been busy. I wish I had listened when you told me to come home earlier. I'm writing this now because I don't know what else to do. I need to explain what happened. I want to write down every detail I can remember. I need to tell you the truth because I think I'm trapped here. I'm not sure if I will get to see you again. As I'm sure you gathered, I stayed late at the office again, and yes, I know, I'm an idiot. You were right. When you called earlier, I could hear it in your voice, how worried you were, but I brushed it off. I laughed at your bad feeling because it sounded like superstition, and I didn't want to hear it. I had work to finish. My deadlines, my clients. I wasn't going to let a feeling pull me away. Stupid. So stupid. I stayed until about midnight. When I finally decided to leave, I grabbed my phone, only to realize it was dead. Completely. It had been plugged in all day, but apparently, the outlet just wasn't working. Of course. I didn't think much of it at the time, figured I'd just charge it in the car on the way home. I wasn't in a hurry. Big mistake. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, thinking it would be a nice change to get a bit of exercise. 6 flights down. The building was quiet, almost eerily so. There was this oppressive silence as I passed each floor, no distant chatter, no sound of typing. Just the dull hum of the building, the kind that starts to make your ears ring if you listen too long. And the air was heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I felt a little off, but I chalked it up to being tired. When I reached the lobby, it was empty. No sign of DeMarcus, the security guy. You know how he usually makes his rounds? Well, I figured he was doing that. Still, it felt strange not to see him at his desk. The place felt too big, too vacant. The kind of emptiness that makes you feel exposed, like something's watching from the shadows. I didn't stay long. I headed to the parking garage. You know how dim that place is, right? Tonight, it felt even worse. Most of the lights were out, and the ones still working flickered like they were dying. My car was parked alone, under the one working light, a flickering, buzzing light. I should have known something was off when I felt that heaviness again. Like the garage was breathing, watching. I thought I was just being paranoid. I got in the car, but when I turned the key, it wouldn't start. Nothing. Not even a click. My phone was still dead, and all I could hear was the faint echo of something. Scraping? Or maybe shuffling, coming from deep in the garage. I tried not to think about it. I thought it was a cat or something, but it didn't sound right. I'm getting goosebumps just writing this. I went back inside to ask DeMarcus for help. 20 minutes passed, and he never came back. It was so quiet, I could hear my own breathing. The only sound was the hum of those awful fluorescent lights, buzzing overhead like they were the only things keeping the dark at bay. Something didn't feel right. DeMarcus never leaves the lobby unattended that long. That's when I saw the flyer for a taxi service pinned to the wall behind his desk. I figured it was my best bet. I used the landline to call them and waited outside for the cab. It was cold, but more than that, it was quiet. Too quiet. You know how there's always some noise, even late at night? A distant car, maybe someone walking by? But there was nothing. Just me, standing there, feeling watched. Then I heard it again, the scraping noise. Louder this time. It felt closer, and it was coming from the direction of the garage. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there. Watching. Waiting. The cab took forever. Way longer than it should have. I was about to go back inside when headlights blinded me. I almost cried with relief. I jumped in, eager to just get home and put this night behind me. The driver was incredibly normal. We talked a bit, made small talk. It felt calming. Safe. We hit a red light, and I don't know why, but I felt the need to confess. I told him about the real reason I stayed out late tonight. About our fight last night. How I didn't want to come home because I was still mad, because we'd said things we didn't mean. I wanted to be petty tonight. I wanted my absence to hurt you. The driver just listened. He gave me some advice, said relationships are hard work, said I should make amends. For a moment, it felt like everything was going to be okay. I felt lighter, like I was on my way back to you, and everything would be fine. But then the light turned green, and he didn't move. I pointed it out. Hey, the light's green. He didn't respond. I nudged him, thinking maybe he didn't hear me. Still nothing. Hey, buddy, the light. I said, louder. I reached out to shake him, but when I touched his arm, it felt wrong, stiff. But he was still breathing. I could see it, shallow and slow, his chest barely rising and falling. But he didn't react to me at all. He was just frozen. Staring straight ahead, hands on the wheel, blinking occasionally. Panic set in. I jumped out of the car, looked around for help, but the streets were empty. Everything was closed. No one around. No traffic, no pedestrians. Just me, this unmoving cab, and the quiet. Too quiet. It was like the world had emptied out, like I was the only one left. I went back to the car, but the driver, he was gone. Just gone. The seat was empty. I tried telling myself that maybe he had gotten out, maybe he had gone for help, but deep down, I didn't believe it. I was too scared to believe it. I got in the driver's seat, thinking I could make my way home myself. I started driving, hoping to find my way back, but I wasn't familiar with the way the cab driver had been taking me. I just kept trying to head east, but the streets kept forcing me to make unexpected turns. I drove for at least 30 minutes and then, I found myself on the street of my office building. Something inside me screamed that this wasn't possible. I should have been miles away from it even if I hadn't been close to home either. But I still clung to hope that the bad feeling was all in my head. I thought of this as an opportunity. Now I could head home the way I was familiar with. I pushed the accelerator to the floor and tried to race by the office, but something went wrong. The taxi made some horrible, metal-rending noises and slowed. It stalled completely, right there, in front of the building. The same spot where I started. I got out. The street was empty, but the feeling that something was watching me was overwhelming now. Like it was right behind me, breathing down my neck. I ran back inside. The lobby was still empty, but the lights, they were flickering, flashing. And, I swear to you, in the dark moments, I could see DeMarcus. Or, something that looked like him. Sitting in the chair, twisted, like his body had been broken in ways that weren't possible. But when the lights flickered back on, the chair was empty. I didn't look back. I ran for the elevator. I pushed the button and waited. I could see the elevator light was on the 10th floor due to the light-up display above the elevator doors. I stood there, awkwardly. Then, I heard the scraping sounds again, still coming from outside the building. I stared at the lit-up 10 and tried to will the number to change. To my delight, it did, quickly changing to 9 and then 8. But there it remained. I heard the lobby doors open. Instinctively, I turned back, certain that the sound was the result of DeMarcus returning from a patrol. But then I heard the scraping. It was much louder. It was inside the lobby. That horrible noise echoed across the large room. I turned and sought out the light-up display, hoping to see progress. There was some. It now read 6. But I could hear something new behind me, skittering, clicking on the floor. The scraping sound grew closer too. So, I abandoned the elevator and rushed into the stairwell. I took the stairs 2 at a time, but no matter how far I went, I never passed any doors. I could hear the first floor doors open and something skitter in. The scraping sound accompanied it. I thought the scraping was something being dragged, and my imagination thought of a giant centipede with a bloated body that scraped along. Either way, I tried to focus on the stairs in front of me. The last thing I wanted to do was trip and fall. Something told me that I wouldn't be able to get up again. Yet, the stairs seemed endless, spiraling up and up, the thing behind me getting closer with every step. Finally, I reached the 6th floor. I bolted to my office, entered the side entrance, and slammed the door behind me. I checked 4 times that it was locked. And now I'm waiting here. I've tried everything. The outlets don't work. My phone won't charge. The computers are on but have no internet. At least that thing in the stairwell never seemed to emerge. At least, I don't think it did. Shortly after I started to settle in here for the night, I heard our front lobby doorbell ring. The echo of the bell reverberated through the hollow office hallways, sharp and unexpected. I ran to the door, hoping that it was someone coming into the office early. Something told me that if I just found one other person, I'd wake from this nightmare. Everything would return to normal. But I hesitated when I reached the lobby. We had thick curtains hanging by the entrance. To see who was ringing the bell, I'd have to get close to the door and pull back the curtain. The bell rang again and again, like the person on the other side was getting impatient. The risk was worth the reward, though. I needed to see a familiar face. I tugged the curtain aside. There, just inches away, was a face. Pale, expressionless, pressed close against the glass. Too close. The man's dead, glassy eyes locked with me, staring through me, unblinking. The stranger's mouth was stretched in a faint, unnatural smile, too wide and too still. He stood unerringly still, as though he had been waiting there for me all along. He otherwise looked like he could have worked here. He looked like a stereotypical businessman, complete with a brown suitcase in one hand. But then the bell rang again. It wasn't coming from the door. It came whenever the stranger, still unblinking, opened his mouth. In a panic, I returned the curtain and retreated to my cubicle in the back of the office. When I could calm down, my only plan was to try and sleep, and hope the world would turn back to normal in the morning. But the lights, they won't turn off. No matter what I do, they stay on, buzzing and flickering, just like the parking garage lights. And I can still hear that thing. It's outside the door, scratching, waiting. I tried to sleep under my desk, but every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it. Something watching. Getting closer. Keeping my eyes closed was impossible. And yet, I kept feeling like the next time I opened them, that stranger's face would be there. Right next to mine. But that's not what happened. Instead, the last time I opened my eyes, I got a different surprise. There was a phone, a landline, sitting on the floor in front of me. It definitely wasn't here before. And now, it's ringing. It's been ringing for a while. I unplugged it, but it won't stop. I don't know what to do. I'm scared, Susan. I'm sorry. I should have listened to you. I shouldn't have stayed late. I wish I could just come home, but I don't think I'm getting out of here. I'm going to answer the phone. I know I shouldn't, but I don't have a choice. That thing outside the door, it's not leaving. I can hear it moving from our front door to the back, and it keeps trying the handles. But the worst part? None of the clocks have moved. It's been midnight for hours now. I really don't think this night is ever going to end. I just want you to know I love you. I'm sorry I wasn't there, but I never stopped loving you. If I don't come home, please remember that.